Hey ho, and welcome to a lecture from me about medieval Scandinavia. Introducing medieval Scandinavia, I guess the concept I have is that hopefully you have a sort of at least a vague idea of what medieval Europe is. And I really mean a vague idea, that's okay. But I don't mean to sort of cover anything about general medieval European history in this session. Nor am I intending to cover any of the kind of specifics of what medieval Icelandic literature is and does. My hope is that you'll pick that up, if nothing else, through reading medieval Icelandic literature. My idea really is to try and provide a bridge between a kind of general understanding of what's going on in medieval Europe and its literature, and the specifics of what you can pick up in actual medieval Icelandic and to some extent other Scandinavian texts. So it's just a general introduction to where medieval Scandinavia is, what happens during that period, big kind of key events and overall themes. I do intend this to act as like an academic lecture. You might have heard me say this before, so I won't go on about it. But take notes, or just generally work with it in ways that that you think you'll find useful to come back to, save you watching it again. Okay, cool. Well, introducing medieval Scandinavia, and especially medieval Icelandic literature. I guess the place to start is to clock where Scandinavia is. He says, demolishing Iceland with his little window. Sorry about that, Iceland. But yeah, in fact, I better bring it back up, hadn't I? There we go. There is Europe. And when you look at Europe like this, it's like you go, blimey, Scandinavia really is big. I mean, from Oslo to Nordkapp is easily as far as it is from Oslo to Rome, if not further. And to get from Oslo to Rome in the Middle Ages, I mean, that's a big old pilgrimage. It's a major operation. So you can see that we're dealing with really vast distances. What makes the trip from Oslo to Rome different from the trip from Oslo to Nordkapp, up at the top of Norway, or the north of Norway, is that you can do the latter easily by sea. So to get by sea to Rome, you have to go all the way around Spain and through the Mediterranean, or you might go through the Baltic and down through the river systems into the Black Sea, and that way. Either way, though, it's a lot of coastline to get round. And one of the key things for understanding how medieval Scandinavia works is that all the blue stuff on this map is a means of communication. This is what's holding these places together. And the clearest example of this is Norway. The word Norway comes from the Old Norse, Norðvegur, meaning north route or northern road north. And if you kind of think of this map from the point of view of medieval Scandinavian sailor, you're going to try and sail close to the coast, makes everything much safer, helps you to navigate. So if you're going to go north from, say, England or, well, pretty much anywhere in Europe, the way you're going to go is along here. So the coast of Norway really is the route north. How does that get to be applied to the whole kind of country? Well, one aspect of understanding that is that really there's very little of Norway apart from this tiny little bit of coastline that goes along the edge, because pretty much instantly the land just goes up. Let's get a picture of that. Not this one. Not that one either. There you go. This is in the western fjords of Norway, not ever so far from Bergen, I should say in English. And yeah, just sheer out of the sea. This is a particularly spectacular fjord, but the observation clearly stands. So the sea is binding this world together. During the medieval period, once Norway kind of gets to be a kingdom, the King of Norway claims control over the Faroe Islands. They're a bit hard to spot on this map. Shetland Islands, Orkney Islands, parts of the Highlands and Islands of Scotland. All of that is, and Iceland, all of that is within the Norwegian kingdom at various points. So you can really see how this is a kingdom that's bound together by sea rather than by land. Is there anything else I want to add on that theme? Let's skip on to the next slide. There we go. And I've said at the top of this slide, Scandinavia is a big place and a varied one. And I'm going to come on to thinking about, well, what holds it together? And in a way, the sea is one answer to that. But let's just get a bit more of a sense of the diversity of what Scandinavia entails. And then we can kind of pick up on what joins it together. So here's Fjord. He says in a bad Norwegian accent, if that. And this is, and I mean, there's plenty of diversity within Norway, but this is an indication of what the place can look like. Goes straight up. Quite a lot of trees though, and that can contrast with Iceland. Here we are in the East Fjords of Iceland, so sort of northeast looking part of the island. In fact, we could show you that on the map, couldn't we? Round this bit where I've got my little hand grasping away. Oops, I'll try to zoom in. Probably regret that. Fine. And yeah, you can see that it's not as dramatic as my photo from Norway, but we've got this kind of very high ground rising up, and here we've got a kind of little bit of flat ground in a fjord. I mentioned when I showed you the picture of Norway, there's a lot of trees. Scandinavia is a big exporter of wood, or at least a significant exporter of wood down to the Mediterranean region because they had a lot of it. It's quite important for them. Iceland's different in that it has basically no trees. There's debate over how much forestation and what sort of forestation there was in the 9th century when human settlers first kind of arrived there. But you can see in this picture that there's a lot of driftwood. When I first started reading sagas, you read stories about people disputing over driftwoods or salvage rights from the beach and having fights over it, trading in it. And I kind of thought, I sort of imagined driftwood as being these little sticks or something. But actually these are huge logs, these are great big trees that have been kind of carried right across the Atlantic by the Gulf Stream. So that's a significant source of timber on Iceland, and in fact it's pretty much the only kind of native timber resource in the island. So like Norway, we've got this kind of sense of fjord activity, and like Norway as well, we've got a country that's benefiting from the Gulf Stream, so it doesn't get too cold in winter, but no trees. That's one aspect of the kind of diversity that's going on in the region. Here's another picture from Iceland. This is from Haukadalir, the Dale of Hawks, or one of several Haukadalir on the island. This is in near Breiðafjörður, which is a large fjord in the west of the island, not in the West Fjords themselves, which are a peculiarly rugged and tricky part of the country. And you can see that it's not kind of too rugged, but nonetheless got this kind of these steep hills. And here we've got a classic glacial river coming down from the glaciers higher up in the country, and cutting these great big paths through a kind of bed of gravel which glaciers have laid down or ground into position, through a series of ice ages. And these rivers will kind of keep chopping and changing their course according to various floods and so forth. So there's a little bit of a sense of Norway, a bit of a sense of Iceland. Iceland there on the, if I'm understanding this map rightly, the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. This is where the North American and Eurasian continental plates are moving apart and creating a lot of volcanic activity. And Iceland is actually the product of that. Iceland is just a volcano, basically a bunch of volcanoes sticking out of the Atlantic. Tricky place to be. So the middle of Iceland is just a volcanic waste ground, and the only settlement is around the edge. So similar to Norway in that respect. Okay, let's move on to some other parts of Scandinavia. Here's a picture of the Faroe Islands. Again, treeless and very, very steep. Very beautiful as well, mind you. But yeah, another kind of rock in the Atlantic, basically. Very different from... Oh, didn't mean to go there. Oh dear. Very different from Sweden. You'll have to bear with me a moment while I find Sweden. Aha, yeah, hang on. Here's Sweden. Good, I'd forgotten about it. This is actually a picture from Gamla Uppsala, or Old... There we go, sorry. Old Uppsala, which is a site of very high status settlement, a regional kind of chiefdom capital, as it were, from mainly before the Viking period and going into the Viking period, so early Middle Ages, sort of 6th century to 9th century. And you have this fabulous series of burial mounds, each of which has yielded all sorts of exciting archaeology. And there you can actually see Uppsala's church as well, which was built after Christianity was adopted in the region. We'll come on to Christianity in due course. But you can see instantly that we're in a really different landscape from the one that I've shown you in Norway, Iceland and the Faroes. Very, very flat, lots of trees, and, well, there we go, just huge swathes of flat ground. Norway and Iceland are pretty good for sheep. You can do other things in Sweden as well, like have crops. And it's a picture taken in the summer, and you can see that, I mean, Scandinavia has a reputation for being kind of brutally cold and everything, and in the winter it can be. But, you know, in the summer it can really be very warm, easily 30 degrees on a good day. Well, climates vary, but, you know, it can be a very pleasant spot. And here is Gamla Uppsala being pleasant. I don't know if you can make this out at the resolution that you'll be seeing this at, but there's that little sticky up thing there is the spire of the cathedral in Uppsala itself. So it went from being kind of regional chiefdom capital, whatever, and ritual kind of centre to being an ecclesiastical centre. It's quite near Stockholm. Sweden is very flat, as I've said, and because of the weight of ice that was lifted off it when all the glaciers melted at the end of the last ice age, it's been bobbing up, geologically speaking. So the land's rising reasonably quickly, which means that the water recedes very quickly, the Baltic Sea. So different settlements keep finding themselves landlocked, which were previously on the sea, and as I've been explaining, anywhere that's anywhere in medieval Scandinavia is on the sea. So chieftains and latterly kings had to keep moving their high status sites to kind of keep up with the moving water. Now Stockholm is on a lake rather than on the Baltic. So it goes on. Okay, really, really different landscape then. And lots of trees. Good. I don't think there's anything I particularly want to add on that theme. Is there anywhere else I want to show you? Oh, well, here's Finland as well. Here on the map, very much a part of medieval Scandinavia, but with some subtleties that I'll sort of unpack a bit in a minute. But you've got Swedish speakers settling around here, probably during the Viking Age and certainly after. This is also part of the Scandinavian world, and geologically very similar to Sweden. This is actually a view from where I used to live in Helsinki, and you can see there's a lot of trees and it's very flat. Yeah, I was lucky in my abode at that time, it has to be said. All right, so that's kind of a rough sense of the diversity of Scandinavia. I haven't got Denmark, that's because I haven't been there yet, so I haven't got any pictures of it. Time will come. Very flat again, relatively fertile, not heavily forested in the way that Sweden and Finland were. So a very different agricultural and geological situation yet again. And then you've got the wider Scandinavian world as well, which I'll come on to. Cool, let's get back to my slides then. And yeah, go on to the fact that I've established or sort of emphasised that Scandinavia is huge and very varied in lots of ways. So that leads us on to thinking, well, what holds it together? What actually makes it a place, a region? And one factor leading into this kind of general sense of Scandinavian cultural unity is language. I've got a quotation here from Gunnlaug's saga, Icelandic saga, probably written in the 13th century. You'll get my bad Icelandic pronunciation, for which I apologise, but there you go, you have it anyway. Ein var þá tunga á Englandi, sem í Noregi och í Danmörku. I won't go on. The rest of it's less relevant to what I want to say. There is sort of intriguing as evidence for what 13th or maybe 14th century Icelanders thought about the similarity of their language to English, which is quite cool. But just to translate that passage I read out, the language in England then was the same as in Norway and Denmark. What's the point that I'm making here? Well, as far as this saga writer is concerned, Norwegian and Danish are the same language. The people in Norway and the people in Denmark speak the same thing. And so you've got this sense of kind of linguistic cultural unity in the region. In fact, my next point, which is about law, illustrates the language point as well. You've got the situation where in Icelandic law, people who speak the Dönsk tunga, or the Danish tongue, or just Scandinavian, we would say, Old Norse, are treated differently legally from people who are kind of more foreign. So there's a sense of kind of cultural cohesion that comes with that linguistic identity. The law point is significant too, in that all of the medieval Scandinavian countries share various kind of features of law and have overlapping practices, which again reflects a kind of cultural cohesion in the region. I've also listed there opposition to ethnic others. I mean, this is another way in which medieval Scandinavians feel a sense of identity, that they are not various other people or peoples. And the key group here, at least as far as our texts are concerned, are the people who, in Old Norse, are called the Finnar. Comes into modern English as Finns in the sense of people who live in Finland. But in Old Norse, it really means people who speak Finnic languages. Back to our map, I think. Finland is where you'll find people speaking Finnish. But we've also got, well, now around just the northernmost part of Scandinavia, a Sami population, and Sami, or the Sami dialects, of which there are many, are also Finnic. They're the same language group, as indeed is Estonian, spoken down in Estonia, predictably. All of these are Finnic languages then, so our text will talk about Finnar, meaning Finnic speakers, and Finns today are very keen to kind of draw a distinction between their culture and Sami culture, and no doubt the Sami are keen on doing the same. But as far as medieval Norse speakers are concerned, they're just one group of people. Back in the medieval period, Sami speakers were no doubt found much further south in Scandinavia as well. Their culture was one economically based on reindeer herding to a large extent, and therefore differed from the kind of fishing and farming culture of Norse speakers, to at least a kind of reasonable degree. I wouldn't want to necessarily overstate those things. So our texts are very keen on sort of setting up Norse speakers as being different ethnically from Sami people or Finnic speakers, and that's another way that cultural cohesion is kind of created in medieval Scandinavia, to the extent that Iceland, which has no Sami population or had no Sami population to speak of, nonetheless produces lots of texts that talk about Finnar. They still seem to be quite an important part of Icelanders' construction of their identity. Yeah, I won't sort of unpack the degree to which medieval Scandinavia is a racist and brutal place, but you know that there's totally an element of that going on too, which is what the medieval world is like. I guess our world is too, to a good degree. In any case, on to happier things. The Kalmar Union. This is the last point that I'd want to raise here, and I'll unpack this a bit in a moment. But there are various kind of political developments during the medieval period in Scandinavia that basically bring the countries, on the whole, into closer political alignment and indeed union of a sort. So all of these things are bringing this kind of geographically huge and diverse place into quite a tight cultural unit, and one that we can meaningfully study as kind of one cultural unit. Okay, having got that set up, I'd like to move on to my next topic, the Vikings, and I think I'll pause here in order to facilitate the easier uploading of this material. So I'll see you again in a minute for some Viking activity.